Welcome back to Sick'em 365 Radio on 365 Sports. Just got a call from Germany. Pretty fired up about that. Going worldwide here. But we bring in Zach Miller. Run It Back with Zach is his blog. And Zach, this morning, Colt Barber, one of our chief cooks and bottle washers here, sent us this article that you wrote about TV viewership, where you really broke it down, not by television market, but by which teams get the most eyes on TV. First of all, I got to know, how long did this take to compile this data? And second of all, what made you look to that deeper level when coming to TV viewership and conference realignment?
Sure. I'd say it probably took me 8 or 9 hours. I had to log every game I did from 2015 to 2019. So 5 years worth of nationally televised games. It was over 1,500 games. It took me a long time punching them all into a spreadsheet. Then I had to do some math, average everything out, and then write the article. So it was definitely time consuming. And what made me do it was actually a couple of weeks ago, I'd written another article where I was trying to kind of quantify which schools have the biggest fan base and which schools might be the most appealing to, to TV networks. And I did not include TV viewership for a few reasons that, I just don't find it to be the best metric. And that's explained in my article. But I had a lot of fans reach out to me and say, this is all about TV. Why don't you have TV numbers? Particularly Cincinnati fans, I think, thought that for some reason, including TV numbers would really improve their ranking. I don't think that this is the best way to look at and determine which schools are the most valuable in this conference realignment round, but it's certainly interesting to look at. And I was curious, too, to see how things would turn out. So I put it all together.
So what were some of the caveats, Zach, that you had to include? I mean, I read the article, but it's not as simple as like you said, there's certain numbers that are included or not included. But, I think the TCU example was a good one. Of they played Ohio State. There was a massive number for that, but that doesn't necessarily equate to TCU pulling in those numbers, correct?
Right. Yeah, that's probably the biggest reason I don't like using these numbers, because there's no real way to say, okay, this game had a really good number. Which team is this because of? Is it because of the matchup? Is it because of one or the other? And I did use TCU as an example because their most viewed game of that time span by far was the game against Ohio State, like you referenced, over 7 million viewers. That's just, my thought is you could probably plug in another team besides TCU, like a Baylor or a Texas Tech, and probably get the same number. Another example, because I've had some Cincinnati fans on me, was Cincinnati and Ohio State played and got 2.6 million, I think it was. Now, the week before, Ohio State played Florida Atlantic and got 2.2 million. So, when I look at that, I don't necessarily say, wow, that number's all because of Cincinnati. I think that's probably mostly because of Ohio State.
When you break these down, if it was 16 team super conferences and 64, the top 64 wouldn't really look all too terribly different, would it, Zach?
No, it wouldn't. I have it pulled up over here. It looks like the teams that would get in that aren't part of one of the power conferences right now would be UCF and Memphis, Houston, which had some big games during that span. And, I did take Army and Navy out of the rankings. They did score very high, mainly because they have their annual rivalry game, which is the only game on that week that a ton of people are watching. So, if you wanted to include them in there, they'd be in the top 64 too. But, I got to say, I hear a lot of people talking about the 4 16 team conferences. I'm not sure it's going to go that way. I don't think there's any reason conferences are going to stop at 16. I don't necessarily know that the Pac-12 or Big Ten wants to go to 16 right now. But, it's certainly fun to think about. It would certainly make for a nice, clean playoff if we actually did it that way.
Absolutely. And yeah, man, it's crazy. There's every scenario under the sun right now, right, is being thrown out there by some college football fan or another. I mean, it's been unbelievable to kind of watch. You mentioned some of those American programs and kind of where they rank. I mean, the very bottom of your list is another American program in SMU, but did anything stand out to you about those brands and maybe lead you to thinking like, you know what, they actually have a pretty good case for why they should be included here?
Yeah, from doing the rankings that I had done a couple of weeks ago and then doing these rankings, SMU finished dead last both times, which does kind of surprise me with SMU being in that Dallas market, obviously, there's a lot of history with that program, good and bad. So I had expected to see a better number from SMU, but after seeing all these numbers, it's really hard to pinpoint a reason that a conference like the Big 12 would want to bring SMU in.
Right.
It does seem like Houston could definitely be a viable team if they want to add another team from Texas. And then, as you're looking at other candidates, if we're just talking about the Big 12, to me, the biggest one is BYU. Obviously has a big fan base, kind of national. Let's see, they landed, looks like 46 in the TV viewership. And that was from some years too that they didn't have a great team. So, you figure that, if they want to deal with the logistic problems that BYU might bring for other sports, BYU seems like a good addition. And then I think you have UCF, Memphis, Boise State, Cincinnati, all kind of in the same ballpark.
But it does go to show you, doesn't it, the SMU thing, that like just because you're in that big city doesn't mean you're getting those big city numbers. And we're hearing a lot of that. I brought up the Kansas graphic from a week ago. They're like, hey, we're basically in Kansas City, so we get those TV numbers, and then,
right.
There's always that attachment that people are trying to make as far as the markets. But, yeah, just because you're somewhere doesn't mean you're pulling those eyeballs in is basically one thing you can take away from this.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, in the Dallas area, just because SMU is there, I would think Texas is probably the most popular team in that market. Oklahoma, Texas A&M. You're also competing with TCU, Baylor. So just because it's a big market doesn't necessarily mean that your team has a big foothold in that market.
Right. What do you think would be the most attractive things to conferences looking to expand? I mean, Oklahoma and Texas are off the board. So, like, brand names are going to be hard to, are not really a thing that you're going to grab. I mean, maybe USC if they remain unhappy with their deal in the Pac-12. But, again, to me, that's still a long shot until something else crazy happens with them. So, past a huge brand name in college athletics, what are you looking for when you're talking about attractiveness to a conference in your estimation?
I think the way things are going, things are going to be all about streaming, way more so than they are. It's going to be about driving subscriptions, where in the last round of realignment 10 years ago, by the Big Ten adding Rutgers and Maryland, all of a sudden you can put the Big Ten network on TV homes in New Jersey, Delaware, Maryland, Virginia, where you're close to DC. And that's not going to be the case anymore. Now you can watch from anywhere. It's going to be a matter of just how many subscribers can you get, and conferences, I think, will really have to look at, what are the biggest fan bases, and you're seeing it now with Notre Dame's going to put a game on Peacock, and they're going to see how many people are hardcore enough Notre Dame fans to sign up to see them play Toledo. And so as we go in the future, maybe not this next round of TV deals, but the next one, it's really going to be all about how many people will sign up for, say, ESPN Plus to watch the Big 12, or, Paramount Plus for the SEC, or, whatever platform ends up holding these different conferences. So that's where the Big 12 is kind of in a interesting spot, looking at these other AAC schools and like BYU and Boise State and thinking, assuming none of these teams are going anywhere else, who can we bring in and increase our value enough where we don't mind now sharing our revenue pot with, another school or two or three or four.
Zach, how much more accessible have streaming numbers been? I mean, I'm so used to the Nielsen ratings, those have always been around, that kind of thing. But like you pointed out, they are so inaccurate at this point because they tell you a little bit of the story, but not all of the story. So where are we in terms of being able to properly evaluate the streaming numbers, who's watching what, when, where, why, and all that?
Yeah, I think that's going to get better. I mean, right now, people streaming games on ESPN Plus, they might also be games that are on ESPNU or ESPN2 or ESPN. And I've seen where I got most of these numbers was from Sports Media Watch, which does a good job of keeping track of this stuff. And for a lot of games, they would have the TV number and then underneath it, a number in parentheses if you included streaming. And then there were other times where it was kind of, you had your TV number somewhere and then the game was showing up again with a streaming number later on. But it's very inconsistent. It's hit or miss, which is another reason that looking at TV ratings or viewership numbers can be tough because you're schools that are playing more games on streaming, you're probably not counting a lot of that stuff. But I do think that'll definitely get better as more and more games go behind. I mean, it should be very easy for these companies to see how many people are viewing, and they'll I would think would want to put that information out there, especially if it's good. Like, I expect that we'll know after that Notre Dame Toledo game how many people watched on Peacock within a week or two to see how that did.
Yeah, it's all very. I mean, just in closing, what was your, I guess, just initial reaction when all this popped off? I've been curious to just kind of, I mean, talking to college football fans, like what they've thought about just the way this thing got rolling a couple weeks ago with Oklahoma and Texas. I mean, obviously for you, you've delved into all sorts of numbers and scenarios, which is awesome. That's what we've been doing too. But just, as a college football fan, what was your initial thoughts?
My first thought was, wow, it just came out of nowhere. There was no inkling of any of it. And all of a sudden that's two of your biggest possible brands going to the SEC. And I think I felt a little excited too. This conference realignment stuff is fun and people really enjoy it and get into it. Like the amount of people reading these blog posts that I write is just seriously insane. It was kind of fun the last time around to see how everything shook out. And I'm excited to see how it shakes out this time. But I just, the more I think about it, unless the Big Ten wants to make a big splash and bring in, USC and some West Coast schools, it's really tough to try to figure out what conferences would want to do to combat Texas and Oklahoma going to the SEC, because there's just not brand name teams out there, that are no brainers like that to be adding to your conference when, I'm sure these schools don't want to be splitting their revenue with more teams unless it's a really, really big name like that.
Yeah, Texas and Oklahoma leaving is like somebody saying, hey, we've got Coca-Cola at our restaurant, and then the other conference going, yeah, well, we have Jolt.
And we have RC.
I mean, like,
it's the same, right? No, it's not the same as Diet Pepsi is not the same as Diet Coke. Yeah. NFL, whenever we're at an event for them, it's not the same.
It's not the same. Yeah, you can't, just because the product is, also in a can and it's brown cola, does not mean it's the same thing. There are different things. Zach Miller, run it back with Zach. Zach, thanks for getting back to me so quickly this morning and jumping on the show. This is great stuff, and we'd love to have you on again sometime.
No problem. Thanks for having me on, guys. Have a good weekend.
There you go. Follow him, Run It Back with Zach blog, Zach Miller. Great stuff from him. When we